People often spend years believing their little everyday quirks are nothing more than awkward habits, whispering sentences under their breath while adjusting something on the table, laughing alone at ideas that make absolutely no sense to anyone else, wandering around the house, creating theories that serve no practical purpose, yet refuse to leave the mind. What nobody realizes is that inside these supposedly useless moments lives a subtle spark that many never recognize. And it becomes almost funny to notice how people try desperately to appear normal, forgetting that what they call weirdness may actually be early signs of a sharper mind. The irony becomes clear when someone tries to hide an odd routine, ignoring the fact that some of the most celebrated scientific minds behaved in far stranger ways without a hint of embarrassment. Richard Feynman, for instance, never cared about looking conventional. In fact, he enjoyed exploring the kind of situations most people would label as unusual. That freedom ended up shaping one of the boldest intellectual personalities of the 20th century. Feynman had no fear of appearing eccentric, and perhaps that was one of his greatest secrets, refusing to shrink himself to fit predictable expectations. Many people live with the same kind of inner spark, but spend years forcing themselves into rigid molds built for someone else. And those molds slowly suffocate creativity, leaving behind a constant feeling of mismatch, as if being curious about odd topics or noticing tiny details were flaws instead of strengths. If you recognize yourself somewhere in this scenario, take a breath. Your mind may simply be operating at a higher intensity than you ever imagined. And that is where this video begins its playful provocation. Contrary to popular belief, behaviors often labeled as strange may reveal a mind that runs faster, dives deeper, and connects ideas in unexpected ways. Anyone familiar with Feynman's personality knows he never fit the standard categories. His charm came from being brilliantly unpredictable. He dismantled complex ideas as if he were taking apart a toy, twisting, flipping, testing possibilities, inventing bizarre analogies, and somehow making the entire explanation more clear than before. What's fascinating is that many people do something similar in daily life without realizing it. Another interesting detail is how these habits emerge without warning. It might happen while standing in a supermarket line. Suddenly the world around disappears and the mind builds an entire chain of reasoning from something incredibly simple, like the shape of a label or a word overheard in a conversation. Or perhaps it occurs when someone stares at a lamp for too long, prompting the classic question, "Are you okay?" Of course they are. The outside looks blank, but inside, dozens of connections are forming at once. Feynman was famous for this kind of productive drift, moments when he seemed absent but was actually assembling pieces of insight no one else would combine. The result? Ideas that transformed entire fields of knowledge. The amusing part is that many who consider themselves distracted are actually performing at a high cognitive level. That's why this series of sections will present amusing, surprising, and often misunderstood behaviors that can reveal quick reasoning, flexible thinking, and a curiosity that refuses to shut off. You might discover that something you once felt embarrassed about is actually a natural sign of an active, restless intellect, something not too different from what fueled Feynman throughout his life. Of course, this doesn't automatically turn anyone into a scientific legend, but it does shine a light on abilities that rarely get acknowledged. If you've ever noticed that you behave differently from most people, don't rush to label these tendencies as flaws. Many times these gestures are subtle manifestations of a brain working in a dynamic way. And to be completely honest, no truly creative person goes through life without a few unusual traits. You might have spent years hearing that you should behave more calmly, more quietly, more predictably. Yet the more you study figures who changed the world, the clearer it becomes that unconventional thinking is a powerful force. Before we continue with the full list, drop a comment sharing one habit you used to think was odd. Let's see how many hidden Feynmans are watching. Some individuals walk through life picking up signals that slip right past everyone else. While others see a street, a noise, a phrase, or a movement, they see relationships forming in real time. They notice alignments between ideas that seem unrelated. They catch the smallest inconsistency in a sentence. They detect rhythms in human behavior as if they were observing code. And what's striking is that this tendency rarely feels special to the person experiencing it. Instead, it appears automatic, natural, almost involuntary. as if their mind were quietly assembling a puzzle long before they realize it. This is the kind of mental activity often associated with quick reasoning, and it happens in ways that outsiders perceive as unusual. Someone makes an offhand remark about the weather, and suddenly the individual who sees connections begins to think about statistics, geographic patterns, and unrelated topics that somehow converge. Nothing about the conversation demanded that level of association, yet the mind insists on linking everything. To many this appears strange. To a sharper thinker, it is simply how the brain operates. Richard Feynman embodied this trait effortlessly. He had an uncanny ability to spot relationships between concepts that others believed were completely separate. It wasn't just intelligence, it was an instinct. When he solved problems, he didn't follow instructions. He invented new paths. He jumped between ideas, rearranged structures, and created explanations nobody had imagined. Watching him think was like observing a painter mix colors no one had ever combined. Those blends created clarity where confusion once existed. People who share this habit often experience a constant background awareness. They might be walking through a quiet room and suddenly recognize a pattern in the way shadows fall on the floor. They may overhear two conversations at once and instantly link themes in both without effort. They can sense a shift in someone's tone before anyone else notices. It can feel overwhelming sometimes because the brain refuses to switch off. But it also reveals an ability to interpret reality with tremendous depth. This behavior becomes even more pronounced in moments of silence. When the world around slows down, their thoughts accelerate. They begin noticing micro details, subtle changes in sound, small imperfections in objects, tiny irregularities in movement. The ability to spot these things is not simply sensitivity, it is cognitive sharpness applied to everyday life. And although others may not understand what is happening, the process is silently shaping insight. What makes this habit particularly interesting is that the person rarely realizes how distinctive it is. They assume everyone processes information the same way. They assume everyone notices the same irregular rhythm in someone's speech or the tiny inconsistency in a story told days earlier. Only after hearing multiple comments like, "How did you catch that?" or "I didn't even notice," do they start realizing that their perception works with a different level of resolution. Many with this trait also struggle with boredom, not because tasks are unimportant, but because their mind is constantly searching for stimulation, links, meanings, logic, structure. When the environment doesn't offer enough input, the brain creates its own associations. This can look like distraction, but it is the opposite. It is a hyperactive cognitive engine generating possibilities where others see nothing. Feynman used this trait throughout his life. He often said that the trick to understanding anything was to play with it mentally until hidden configurations revealed themselves. He would rotate an idea, test it from another angle, examine a smaller part of it, or compare it to something unrelated. The moment others stopped thinking was often the moment he began. Curiosity guided him toward connections nobody else expected. People who possess this same instinct tend to find unconventional solutions. They may enter a situation believing they have no answer, only to notice a detail that shifts everything. They see structures beneath the surface, and once they identify those structures, clarity follows. It can make them excellent problem solvers, quick learners, and deep thinkers, even if they never intended to be. However, because this talent feels subtle, many undervalue it. They believe it's ordinary. They think it's simply paying attention. But attention alone doesn't form patterns. Attention observes. Connection interprets. And those who interpret constantly are operating with a cognitive mechanism that functions several layers above the usual. If you've ever caught something invisible to others, recognized connections instantly, or understood complexities without needing a full explanation, you may possess this same habit. And the more it happens, the more you'll notice that your mind behaves like a sophisticated scanner, integrating pieces of information before you consciously decide to analyze anything. Before we continue to the next section, share in the comments one moment when you noticed something nobody else caught. Those stories reveal more about your mind than you think. There is a particular type of mind that cannot accept an idea simply because it has been repeated 1,000 times. It needs to verify, examine, reinterpret, and confront every statement with personal logic. While most people nod and move on, these individuals stop everything to ask, "Why does it work like that?" Or, Who decided this makes sense? That single impulse often irritates those who prefer easy explanations, yet it reveals a rare intellectual independence. Instead of absorbing information passively, this mindset dissects it from the inside out. This trait appears early in life. Children who constantly challenge adults with endless why questions often grow into adults who still refuse to accept superficial answers. They do not question out of rebellion. They question because the surface never satisfies them. Something inside pushes them to search for structure, cause, and mechanism. This internal pressure doesn't disappear with age. In fact, it intensifies as they acquire more knowledge and realize that most widely accepted explanations are vague, incomplete, or simply convenient. Richard Feynman was a master at this. He famously dismantled assumptions that entire groups of experts considered unquestionable. He refused to imitate the style of people who pretended to understand things they clearly did not. Instead, he confronted every subject, no matter how established, with a fresh pair of eyes. When someone declared that something was true, because that's how it's always been, he treated that phrase as an invitation to investigate further. To him, tradition was not evidence. Habit was not proof. Dogma was not clarity. People with this questioning habit behave in a similar way in everyday life. When they hear a rule, they want to know the reasoning behind it. If the logic is weak, they immediately sense inconsistencies. When they encounter a common belief, they probe the foundations to see whether it stands on solid reasoning or on cultural inertia. This tendency often intimidates those who rely on quick justifications. It also explains why these individuals are sometimes labeled difficult, when in truth they are simply unwilling to follow ideas without understanding their structure. Another interesting detail is how these minds react during conversations. While many participate to agree politely, those who question everything listen for logical gaps. The moment they detect one, their entire focus shifts to examining it. They are not trying to embarrass anyone, nor are they attempting to dominate the conversation. They simply can't ignore a missing piece. This instinct is similar to someone noticing a loose thread on a sweater. Once seen, it cannot be unseen. This habit also influences decision-making. People who question the obvious rarely accept shortcuts. They need clarity before committing to anything. Whether it's choosing a new routine, beginning a project, or analyzing a problem, they refuse to move forward without a full picture. That is why they often avoid quick conclusions. They know that rushing leads to mistakes. Their process may seem slow, but the accuracy they achieve compensates for the time invested. In learning environments, this trait becomes particularly powerful. While others memorize formulas, these individuals want to understand the underlying idea. They explore alternative interpretations, challenge outdated explanations, and reconstruct knowledge in their own words. This is precisely what made Feynman such a remarkable educator. He insisted that true understanding required breaking concepts down until even a child could grasp them. Anything more complex than that meant the explanation was incomplete. However, this questioning behavior sometimes leads to misunderstandings. People around them may interpret their constant inquiries as confrontational or unnecessary. But for someone with an active, independent mind, asking questions is not an attack. It is a natural form of exploration. Their motivation is clarity, not conflict. They simply refuse to pretend they understand something when they don't. There is also a subtle emotional component to this trait. For many, accepting vague answers feels uncomfortable. It creates an internal friction, a sense that something essential is missing. So they continue investigating until the puzzle resolves. This motivation comes from curiosity, persistence, and a deep desire to grasp reality as accurately as possible. When this habit is cultivated, it becomes a powerful intellectual tool. It helps individuals avoid manipulation, misinformation, and cognitive traps. It sharpens intuition, enhances analytical thinking, and encourages creativity. Feynman used this instinct to break down complicated scientific problems. Others use it in daily life to navigate challenges more effectively. The mechanism is the same. Nothing is accepted without examination. If you recognize this impulse in yourself, if you constantly dig for the real explanation behind everything, you might share the same cognitive instinct that shaped some of the greatest thinkers in history. Before we move on, comment one example of something you questioned that most people accepted without thinking. Your story might help someone else recognize their own brilliant habits. There are people who recharge their minds not through noise, crowds, or constant stimulation, but through silent stretches of time when no one demands anything from them. While many interpret solitude as loneliness or isolation, certain individuals experience it as mental oxygen. Their thinking becomes clearer, their creativity expands, and their internal world grows more structured. For them, quiet moments are not a retreat from life. They are an opportunity to organize thoughts, restore emotional balance, and examine ideas without interruption. This behavior often confuses outsiders. Some believe that anyone who seeks extended silence must be avoiding responsibility or withdrawing from social interaction. Yet the truth is far more nuanced. People with highly active minds frequently feel overstimulated in loud or chaotic environments. The constant influx of information disrupts their internal clarity. When they step away from that noise, everything falls back into place. Their ideas start aligning, associations form effortlessly, and mental fatigue melts away. Richard Feynman experienced this frequently. Although he was known for his humor, charisma, and social confidence, he also valued long periods of personal space. He would disappear into his own world while working on problems, isolating himself from distractions to let thoughts unfold naturally. During these moments, his reasoning flowed with remarkable precision. That balance between social energy and private concentration allowed him to produce insights that still influence scientific thinking today. People who share this trait often describe a strange sense of relief when they are finally alone. Their breathing slows, their thinking becomes more organized, and they feel a subtle, comforting stillness. This state allows them to explore mental landscapes that would remain hidden in a busy environment. The quiet enables them to revisit unresolved questions, analyze situations from new angles, and construct new interpretations of events or ideas. It's almost as if solitude acts as an amplifier for cognitive clarity. Another characteristic of these individuals is their ability to enjoy activities that others consider boring when done alone. Reading for long stretches without distraction, sitting quietly while observing their surroundings, or tinkering with complex ideas are all natural extensions of their inner rhythm. They do not crave constant entertainment because their mind supplies its own. In fact, internal reflection often provides more stimulation than external noise ever could. Similar behavior appears when they face stressful experiences. Instead of seeking immediate conversation or distraction, they tend to step back and reflect privately. This gives them space to understand their emotions, evaluate decisions, and prepare for whatever comes next. Their strength lies not in avoiding interaction, but in cultivating a steady internal foundation. However, this doesn't mean they dislike people. On the contrary, they often enjoy meaningful conversations, deep connections, and intellectually stimulating exchanges. What drains them is superficial chatter, forced social situations, or environments where they cannot think clearly. Solitude becomes a way to preserve energy for interactions that truly matter. Another interesting aspect is that this preference for quiet moments often leads to increased creativity. When their mind is free from interruptions, they begin drawing connections between ideas, developing original insights, and constructing solutions that feel almost effortless. Many breakthroughs arise when the world is silent. This is why some of history's most inventive thinkers consistently sought environments where they could be alone with their thoughts. Feynman himself demonstrated this rhythm repeatedly. Whether he was working on complex equations, experimenting with new concepts, or simply reflecting on everyday situations, he used his private time not as an escape, but as a tool. That habit allowed him to unlock creative perspectives others could not imagine. People with similar tendencies often discover that their most powerful thoughts emerge precisely when no one is watching. Despite all this, individuals who value solitude sometimes struggle to explain their need for quiet moments. They may worry that others interpret their behavior as cold or distant. In reality, their preference is rooted in mental preservation, not emotional detachment. Their internal world is rich and demanding, and silence gives them room to navigate it with ease. If you relate to this tendency, if you feel calmer, sharper, and more yourself when you have uninterrupted space, you may share the same cognitive inclination that strengthened some of the brightest minds in history. Before we continue, comment one thing you enjoy doing alone that helps you regain mental clarity. Someone reading your answer might discover they're not alone in this habit. There is a moment, often unnoticed, when someone with an unusually sharp mind begins adjusting their surroundings rather than trying to force themselves through them. This subtle shift happens long before visible results appear, and it acts almost like an internal compass that refuses to be ignored. Instead of battling distractions, this kind of mind rearranges routines, trims noise, and creates spaces where clarity can breathe. People who operate at this level rarely announce what they're doing. They simply restructure their environment piece by piece until it supports their thinking instead of competing with it. A simple desk rearranged, a different time chosen for demanding tasks, a quiet corner claimed as a refuge for reflection. None of these actions look extraordinary on the surface, yet they expose something far deeper beneath them. A person who chooses surroundings that enhance concentration displays an understanding many overlook. The brain performs at its highest when friction is removed. Rather than relying on motivation alone, they design conditions that make progress natural. This ability to reorganize the world around them becomes a signature trait of advanced thinkers. This behavioral pattern also shows up in relationships. Instead of staying attached to draining interactions, they distance themselves from dynamics that cloud reasoning. They lean toward individuals who spark curiosity or offer constructive viewpoints. Without confrontation or drama, they drift away from influences that blur their focus and toward people who amplify it. Another revealing aspect is how they handle time. They protect certain hours almost religiously, not because they are rigid, but because they've learned that mental quality depends on rhythm. They treat their attention as a limited resource and schedule their day in a way that honors this fact. Small commitments are moved, habits are replaced, and routines evolve as understanding grows. What makes all of this remarkable is its silence. There is no grand declaration, no dramatic transformation. The signs appear slowly, through tiny decisions that seem insignificant to anyone watching. Yet each adjustment reflects an inner precision, a mind refusing to settle for chaos when clarity is within reach. In the end, this quiet reorganization becomes a powerful message. True intelligence doesn't always show itself in big gestures. Sometimes it's found in the calm decision to shape the world around you so your thoughts can finally breathe freely. A revealing trait of elevated thinkers appears not in their answers, but in the unusual questions they begin to ask. While most people focus on what to do next, these minds quietly shift toward why things function the way they do. This change doesn't happen abruptly. It unfolds through small moments of curiosity that gradually reshape their entire approach to understanding. They start by questioning routines that everyone else accepts without hesitation. A simple task, a familiar rule, or a long-standing belief becomes an opportunity to examine hidden layers. They aren't trying to challenge others. They're trying to grasp the invisible mechanisms shaping everyday life. This instinct to probe beneath the surface reveals a rare mental flexibility. Another sign emerges in conversations. Instead of jumping to opinions, they pause to explore angles nobody noticed. They ask things like, what would this look like if the assumption behind it were false? Or, what detail here is being overlooked? These questions aren't meant to impress. They're the natural byproduct of a mind that refuses to be satisfied with the first explanation that appears. This habit also influences how they learn. Rather than collecting information blindly, they look for the principle hidden inside each concept. They search for the root idea that holds everything together, knowing that once they find it, the rest becomes easier to understand. This is where their brilliance quietly differentiates itself. They don't memorize. They simplify until the truth becomes so clear it no longer needs decoration. Their questions take on a distinctive tone as well. They stop being afraid of appearing strange or out of place. They inquire about things others consider obvious because they know genuine insight is often buried beneath what everyone assumes. This confidence comes not from arrogance, but from a deep awareness that progress is built on curiosity that dares to step outside the expected. As this pattern strengthens, their questions begin guiding their decisions. Instead of rushing into action, they reflect on the hidden consequences and long-term patterns. Every choice becomes a chance to understand something bigger, something that connects pieces others never considered related. By the time people notice, these unusual questions have already transformed the way they think, work, relate, and create. And this quiet transformation becomes one of the clearest signals of a mind operating on a higher level. Not louder, not faster, simply wiser. Among all the unusual behaviors connected to high intelligence, there is one that emerges later, almost sem querer. The habit of turning every experience into meaning. It doesn't matter if the moment is chaotic, calm, painful, ordinary, or extraordinary. Something inside the individual begins collecting subtle lessons that others ignore. This process is not forced. It grows from a deep internal sensitivity that forms with time, observation, and sincerity. People with this rare trait start noticing how emotions influence choices, how intentions shape outcomes, and how small decisions echo in unexpected ways. They recognize connections hidden inside everyday events and use these insights to adjust their path without drawing attention. It's a form of refinement, a slow polishing of their inner compass. This habit also reveals itself in how they handle setbacks. Instead of collapsing under frustration, they shift into a thoughtful mode, analyzing what the situation is trying to show them. They aren't looking for someone to blame or for excuses to justify the difficulty. They're searching for understanding. That search builds resilience, not the loud kind people praise, but a quiet, consistent strength. Over time, this turns into a remarkable ability to navigate life with calm clarity. When something unexpected happens, they don't respond impulsively. They breathe, they observe, they interpret. They can see the difference between noise and signal, between distraction and direction. This selective perception gives them an advantage that feels almost invisible from the outside, yet completely transformative from within. Another aspect of this final habit is gratitude. Not the repetitive cliché version, but an authentic appreciation that comes from perceiving the depth hidden in daily moments. They begin valuing insights more than applause, growth more than comfort, truth more than convenience. This shift places them in a category of thinkers who aren't driven by ego, but by awareness. As they live this way, intelligence stops being just an ability and becomes a kind of quiet wisdom. Their presence feels different, their choices feel intentional, and their words carry weight because they come from understanding shaped through lived experience. And that perhaps is the strongest sign of all, when intelligence is no longer something they show, but something they naturally embody.